a lot of people, when you think about the 80s and the 90s of Miami, the thing that automatically gets thought about were the drugs coming into Miami. Was that another challenge that you inherited?
Yes, and it was image challenge, but also reality. We did have a lot of people getting shot at. One time I said in the national media, I probably shouldn't have said it, about 50% of the homicides are the bad guys killing each other.
Why did Miami gain so much popularity in the 80s?
Well, what happened before the 80s was devastating. In 1981, Time magazine did their cover story, Miami Paradise Lost. And that's what we inherited. One of the problems before I was elected in 1985 is we would go to people from outside Miami to design our buildings. That's a big mistake. To the extent possible, you don't exclude world-renowned architects, but we had the best architects right here because they understand the tropical or semi-tropical climate. There was tension in the three major groups.
I will say it's a pleasure to have you here because I don't think I've seen you on a long form, like a podcast style like this, to where you can go in depth on subjects that we're going to cover today. And there's a lot to talk about. And like we spoke off camera, your son, Francis Suarez, was his last State of the City yesterday. And, just like we just spoke about, it didn't feel like the end, right? But I wanted to ask you, why did Miami gain so much popularity in the 80s?
Well, what happened before the 80s was devastating. In 1981, Time magazine did their cover story, Miami Paradise Lost. And that's what we inherited. Divisiveness, a lot of people who had arrived here very recently. At one point I told the media, 1 out of every 12 people in Miami-Dade, in our metropolis, arrived here within the last 18 months. They couldn't believe it. That was Mariel, right after Mariel. And the government wasn't helping. We had a very charismatic mayor, like we do now, my son, but not organized and not as unifying as he should have been. To get reelected, he did some things, and I haven't even mentioned his name because I don't like to say anything negative about anybody. I actually admire the former mayor quite a bit for his charisma, but it was not a unifying force whenever he would have an election every 2 years. The elections were every 2 years. Thank God when I was elected in 85, I was reelected in 87. That was not easy. And then 4-year term in 89 to 93. So I served 8 years. And those were not easy years for Miami. We also were beginning to have the feel of a city that nobody really wanted to, have a sports franchise. We only had one, the Dolphins, and they were very dissatisfied with the Orange Bowl. We fixed it up, did everything in my power to keep them. And ultimately, they made a decision, to move after I left office, admittedly, but still. And now we started right at that time. We started pushing to be a Major League Baseball franchise and an NBA basketball franchise, and I was really involved in both of those. A lot of times that hasn't been, publicized particularly.
So you were directly involved in the acquisition of an NBA franchise as well as a professional Major League Baseball franchise?
Yes. I took office with one professional team that was discontented, dissatisfied and wanted to move out, and I left 3 professional franchises, not counting the Panthers, which played at our arena that we built for.
So they didn't have their arena in Sunrise?
No. And we had arena football too for a little while in there. Now we are a city. You know how many cities in the world have the 5 most important professional sports?
Can I guess?
Including F1, Formula 1, and MLS, and basketball, baseball.
Under 10?
And football?
No, under 20.
1.
1?
Miami.
Wow. No way.
And the amount of revenue that's generated from sports is crazy.
And as I was telling in a radio program earlier today, when companies make a decision to move to your city, they look at things like education, they look at the workforce. Sometimes they look at transportation, if that's an issue. It's not as big an issue now because a lot of people work out of their homes. But the other factor, maybe the most important, where does the owner want to live? And the owners don't want to live in a city that doesn't have the major sports franchise. They love, particularly, people like Ken Griffin and people that can afford to have, the ringside seats. So now we're the only city in the world that has the 5 major audience sports. We also were lacking a little bit educationally in the 80s. Okay. Miami-Dade College did not reach the level that they have reached now. FIU did not have a medical school, did not have a law school. And FIU's law school now is the one where the students do the best in the bar exam. It's a major institution now.
Yeah, I'm a student at FIU, and I see the 5th floor of, I forgot the building name, but it shows you the history of FIU, and it's crazy to see it from like groundbreaking to the first building to now opening. So I saw it, and it's very fascinating. I wanted to ask, what were other challenges that you inherited? Because I know a lot of people, when you think about the 80s and the 90s of Miami, the thing that automatically gets thought about were the drugs coming into Miami with, documentaries like Cocaine Cowboy that, kind of really showed it. Was that another challenge that you inherited?
Yes, and it was image challenge, but also reality. We did have a lot of people getting shot at. One time I said in the national media, I probably shouldn't have said it, about 50% of the homicides are the bad guys killing each other, which, then I said the guy who got shot probably deserved it, but I shouldn't have said that. And the image that went with it. Now, Miami Vice came out around the same time. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, including one of my commissioners, objected to their filming here, and also the famous movie Scarface.
They objected to filming Scarface in Miami?
Yes.
Why was that?
Because of the image issue, because of the idea
that
it
would paint Miami
and that these guys were Cubans, and that we were all about crime and drugs. In reality, by the time that I had served a year or two, Miami Vice had been established. Those guys, by the way, became friends of mine, both of them, the main actors. And Miami Vice actually was a positive image force for us because people would see that bay, the architecture. I don't know if people realize we have the best architects in the world. One of the problems before I was elected in 1985 is we would go to people from outside Miami to design our buildings. That's a big mistake. To the extent possible, you don't exclude, world-renowned architects, but we had the best architects right here because they understand the tropical or semi-tropical climate. They understand we like colors a lot.
And the culture.
They understand the culture. And when I came to Washington, D.C. from Cuba as an exile, and I saw the red brick buildings and townhouses and stuff, and I thought, well, these people don't have paint. They don't have, parrepellar or whatever you call that, stucco or whatever. And so, Miami acquired an image and a reality of a city of the future. And then T.D. Allman wrote a book about that and called it Miami, the City of the Future. He had some very nice things to say about me. We had a lot of internal dissension. Mm-hmm. It was a growing city. We had issues like English only, and we had those debates. I would say, I'll challenge anyone that wants to somehow exclude Spanish. I'll challenge them to a test in English. You see who does better. And so there was a lot of that divisiveness. Some of it, if not more than 50%, promoted, unfortunately, by the media. It's a sad commentary on that business.
Yeah, I definitely think media has, especially now with social media, because it's different from back then media. You paint a narrative and you paint a picture, it gets publicized and shown to millions and masses like it couldn't have been before. Well, last question on this subject, but would you say then, because a lot of people say this, that Miami was built on drug money?
No, I've seen and read the books, and I've seen the videos, and not at all any more, for example, than Havana was built on prostitution. I mean, I grew up in Havana, and I wasn't that naive. 11 and 12 years old, I knew what was going on. Very little prostitution in Havana that I could see. I guess there was a red light district. There's a red light district in Amsterdam. I've seen that. By the way, it's not very exciting. If you want to see that kind of stuff in Miami, there were, it was not a big part of the economy. What was happening in the economy was a bunch of people that were immigrants and that would start working, doing whatever was available, cleaning homes, doing construction work. And pretty soon you would see that they had a little business card, and they figured out that they could start a business in construction, for example. And that was the biggest single industry that, brought about this incredible renaissance that we see now.
Throughout the 80s, the actual construction
Yes.
from immigrants coming in and establishing themselves and a business.
Yes.
Okay.
And they would have their business card, and they couldn't sign, as the permits and the design, but they would get somebody to sign for them and give them 10% or whatever the deal was. And then pretty soon they started taking the exams, and they became contractors, electrical, mechanical, general contractors. There was a famous Cuban-American developer who's now a billionaire. His name is Armando Codina.
Yeah.
And Armando would say that, I don't know if I'm allowed to use the words that he used, a developer is un come mierda con crédito, We can translate that to...
For the English, we'll put
a
subtitles.
dingbat with credit, and so that happened. The professionals, we fought to get other Hispanic groups that came here the ability to become doctors and lawyers. The toughest one was for lawyers because it's a whole different system in a whole different language. But give credit to the University of Florida and to the state of Florida. They allowed a lot of folks that had practiced law in Cuba to take a 2-year accelerated course. And if they could pass the bar exam, which wasn't easy for them. I took the bar exam the same year that those guys graduated from the 2-year program. And they were pretty sharp. But, if you were educated in the U.S., you know how to answer questions, sometimes just the way it's phrased grammatically, with the, multiple choice. For me, that's a piece of cake. For those guys, it was tough. But so all of those were factors in making Miami what it is now.
Would you also say, because now living here, I think we could all agree, a lot of people would agree that Miami is, as you say, a cultural melting pot. Was it always like that? I mean, in the 80s, did you see this, diversity of, you had the Cubans, you had the Venezuelans, you had the Colombians, and do you think that's a net positive?
Yes, but there was tension in the three major groups,
Was there? Wow.
Hispanics, blacks, and we used to call them Anglos, I guess nowadays, white Americans, I guess, native born. There's a lot less tension now because there are that many different groups, and they collaborate. We fought to make sure that would happen. I joined black leaders in Miami in filing suit against the county and against the school board to establish single-member districts. And now you look at the county commission, okay, there's 13 commissioners. There's not a single white male, Anglo-white male. There are white Hispanics on there. And that was done in a collaborative way with the black community. So there was a sense of collaboration and unity there. My 3 police chiefs, when I was mayor, all 3 that I had during my tenure were black, and including the first one ever, and succeeded by 2 others. City clerk was black, city attorney was black at the end of my tenure, and there was not that notion that there had always been an issue in high-level appointments about who do you hang out with. If you don't break bread with someone, if you only break bread with people of your own ethnic group, you're not going to right away think this will be the ideal manager, this will be the ideal city attorney, this will be the ideal police chief. And I always made an attempt and made sure that my subordinates did too, to socialize with all the ethnic groups. And of course, politics actually brings the ethnic groups together. You got to get the, it's typically 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. You can't win with just one ethnic group.
Oh, of course, and more than anything, it's coming from a higher level of consciousness to understand that, yes, we are different ethnically, but we are all very much the same, right? We bleed the same color, and it's coming from a place of service for the entire community as a whole.
And the culture includes, and this is something that's in Democracy in America 2024, it includes a lot of religious affinity. If you have a society where constantly you're trying to say, in the public square you cannot mention God, in the public square you cannot mention religion, in the public square you cannot mention the example of Jesus or Abraham or whatever, and that's all backwards, because that is part of our culture. And by the way, it's in many ways the richest part of our culture. The lessons in the Bible for politicians, for civic leaders, for teachers are some of the greatest lessons in human literature. And that's part of the fabric of the society. And many of the ethnic groups that arrived later said, we're bringing this with us, and you're not taking this away from us. And that's happening now in the United States after a few years of some exclusion of some of that in the public.
Do you feel like there is now a consciousness shift back to Christ and a consciousness shift back to more traditional Christian values to help the nation move forward?
Absolutely. And science is also supporting that. We treat addiction, we treat depression, we treat the families that break up. And to do it successfully, you need to bring in some dose of spirituality. Otherwise, the society doesn't work. And the traditional family is the essential unit of society. So you can have all kinds of alternatives, and we're very tolerant here in Dade County, Miami-Dade now. But always stick to the idea that the traditional family has to be supported. And the groups that are in Miami believe that strongly, and they're not going to let any ultra-secular society or ultra-secular elite groups change that. That's part of who we are.
And yesterday, Jay and I went to Texas. I don't know if you're familiar with Glenn Beck.
Yes.
We went to interview him yesterday, and he had this, I don't know if you've seen his collection of like all the artifacts that he's got in. Crazy stuff. I was just showing Mark off camera. He had, and I took a picture specifically he has the writings of George Washington signed by him, Abraham Lincoln signed by him, the Founding Fathers, the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. And I took a picture of everything because in everything, God was mentioned. Absolutely. There was not one thing that God was not mentioning. And I think it's just a testament of what, is being said, that God is trying to be taken out of society. But the truth is, the Founding Fathers and our country, the states, were founded with that principle.
One of the best examples of that, and arguably one of the greatest Americans ever, was Abraham Lincoln. And he told his cabinet, I am not going to dictate the elimination of slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation, until I get a sign from God. Okay, and that sign, and he would say that to his cabinet, because some were arguing that he should do it earlier, some later, depending if they were on the, more conservative or liberal side. And he said, we need to have a sign that propels us to have the confidence to do this. And of course, it was Gettysburg. Or maybe it was an earlier battle, I forget, but it was an important battle that was won. Yeah. And then he did the emancipation. But all the discussion centered on providence, and all the discussion centered, they used to also call it nature's God. I love that because I write books about religion and science, yes. And the two things fit in together so nicely. Mm-hmm. you have a little bit of my last book before it even gets published. He's
Phenomenal. Yeah, very interesting way of putting words together to evoke a different understanding and a different emotionality from the reader. Phenomenal work so far.
And the other thing that was interesting about Miami that maybe we didn't initially appreciate, you touched on it a little bit, the educational thing.
Yeah.
You know, we came here, and of course we had to pick up the language. So in some ways, you know, maybe we made some mistakes in the English language, but a lot of science background, math in Latin America, astronomy. My high school in Cuba, Belen, had an observatory, and they sent a message in the year 1900 to Texas, telegram, saying you're about to get hit by the worst hurricane that we've ever measured. And they weren't, the predecessor agency to the NOAA wasn't allowed to disseminate that, and they didn't. And somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 people died in Galveston, Texas. And of course, after that, the NOAA said, oh yeah, if those Cuban, they were actually Spanish priests. The idea that many Americans had was that folks from Latin America, Central America in this case, but Latin America generally, were not as educated. And of course, this made no sense because these are the cradle of civilization in the Americas, you know, beginning actually with St. Augustine, which was way before the Pilgrims landed, you know, up north. So, and that, by the way, that was also a very helpful thing. The Spanish rule in Florida and the French in Haiti and so on were very helpful to the slaves. There were many laws in the Spanish Constitution and Charter protecting slaves, and but also in the sciences. I mean, it was amazing. You know, my dad went to college here. He went to Villanova in Philadelphia, the same college that I attended, and he went to Cuba. He was dean of engineering at Villanueva, which is Villanova in Havana, and his level, his students later got PhDs in the United States, and one of them, Niels Diaz, what Cuban father would name a kid Niels, you know, like Niels Bohr, who discovered basically the atom, became chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I visited him when he was chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. He's still alive. And a lot of these engineers and professionals, doctors, writers, you know, some of the great filmmakers, you know, and of course, ultimately actors too.
Yeah.
And many of them Miami born and bred. And entertainers.
Yeah,
Can't forget the entertainers.
There's just a lot of talent that's come out from Miami, South Florida, in every industry, and it's good to see. And I want to you talk about that, you know, your relationship with your grandfather. I want to talk about your relationship with your son, like we mentioned in the beginning, who is the current mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez. What was the advice that you gave to him? What was, you know, the lessons that you were telling him?
As he tells it, you know, one of the biggest lessons that he had to learn growing up was to emphasize the positive. The media has a problem with that. They want to emphasize the negative for whatever reason. They think it sells newspapers. And in his own life, he said publicly in some of the interviews that he's done, when my dad was sort of, you know, feed me with this notion that emphasize positive things and ignore a little bit the negativity. But besides that, scholarship. I mean, one day he was a freshman at FIU. Hadn't really in high school picked up books too much. He was very good at math. My whole family were all good at math. And reading came naturally because, you know, the environment that he was in. I mean, he would hear a lot of speakers. He would hear me quote. He can quote Winston Churchill all the time. I'll tell you a story about that if you want to hear. But he was a sophomore or still a freshman at FIU. Hadn't really picked up a book, you know, a biography or whatever. And he went into a little library that we have at home that's kind of a den that's fixed up to be a library. And there's tons of great books in there. great biographies of Douglas MacArthur, Winston Churchill, Patton, et cetera, et cetera. And then he read all of those, a lot of political philosophy in there. And then he said, what are these little yellow pamphlets? And I said, those were put out, and you can get them. The Daughters of St. Paul up there in Biscayne and whatever, and I think they're way down south now. Those are the encyclicals. He says, what are the encyclicals, Dad? And I said, the encyclicals are pronouncements made by the popes that basically capture all of Judeo-Christian political philosophy. And I emphasize the Judeo part because the Ten Commandments is the best code of laws in history up until 2,000 years ago. And it was not discarded by the Christian tradition. It was just added to.
Yeah.
And I said that one in particular is the most important one in the area of social justice. And it was by Leo XIII. And he read it. And years later, I was reading a book by Jonathan Alter, The Defining Moment, about FDR. And when FDR was a young man, everybody thinks FDR was brilliant and well-read. They're probably thinking of Teddy, who really was very educated. But one of his assistants, a guy named Walsh, who later became the Secretary of State, said, Franklin, you don't know too much about anything. Here, read this. And he gave him that social encyclical by Leo XIII on the condition of the working classes. In Latin, it's Rerum Novarum. And that sets out the principle that we do have a social obligation to the people that are more needy. Many times people that are needy, they could be immigrants. They could be someone that fell into an addiction. They could be someone whose parents broke up and they suffered, and so they're not 100% together. And society has to help elderly, young kids, and kids that don't have, parents that were university professors like I did. I mean, I learned the English language like in a month. I think I was telling you the story. I was immersed in it, but not everybody has that facility, or has the scholarships that were given to me. I was given scholarships all the way through the end of law school.
You served for 8 years, and then you became mayor again in '97, I believe, right? But then shortly after 3 months,
They gave the mayoralty to the other candidate, right?
So what exactly happened with that?
They invalidated close to 5,000 absentee ballots, and they said, we're just not going to count them. Even though, because the disparity in the absentee ballots was too high in my favor. But that had a reason to it. There was a candidate running in the district that includes Little Havana. His name was Humberto Hernandez, and he did an excellent job, as did we, of obtaining absentee ballots. So why that disparity would cause the election to be invalidated, in particular, if you're going to invalidate, the first judge invalidated the whole thing and said, let's just do it again. I said, fine, we'll do it again. But to say that even though there had been a runoff in which I won both the absentee ballots and the votes at the poll, a former Kennedy School professor at Harvard, who was a congressman, called it a judicial coup d'etat. A judicial coup d'etat.
Explain that.
Coup d'etat is like an overthrow, like a undemocratic wresting power away from somebody because the courts wanted to make that decision. So, I live with it. Francis will tell you that he learned from that experience more about me and how to feel about me than all the other stuff. Because he said, he'll tell you about it. He said, Dad, I always thought you were first in everything and you went to the best schools and best law firms and whatever. And then I saw you getting kicked, and on the ground, and you said, I'm still the same guy, and I'll get back in. I'll get back on the horse, and I ultimately did.
I love that because I say that it's always very easy to be positive and grateful when everything is going fantastic. But the true depth and character of a man is shown to the world when things don't necessarily go his way. Taking a step back to the biggest lesson that Francis publicly states about you making an emphasis on the positive, right? Obviously, the city of Miami is the capital of capital. I always go around saying that there is truly no city in the world like it, okay? What are some of the positive outlooks and things that you're looking forward to the future, particularly for the city of Miami?
There's no limit. There's no limit to what the city can be. I mean, you can reduce homicide rates to 28 as opposed to 200 and some the year before I was elected. You can have an unemployment rate of 1.8%. I mean, that's ridiculous. We can't get people to be to hire in restaurants and in clubs. I used to have a client, one of the most elegant clubs in Miami, if you consider all of that elegant, I suppose. But anyhow, one of the most expensive ones. And he couldn't open 5 or 6 days a week because he couldn't get employees. So there is a disparity between the service employees and the service sector, because what you have to do there is be able-bodied, smile, know how to wash dishes, know how to serve tables, know how to, help people at the hospital, but Miami does have now an issue with growth because of the cost of housing. And what the city has done is just incredible. What was announced yesterday at the State of the City is an incredible spurt of real estate growth. You're probably familiar with it. One time I saw that Francis was in D.C. at the meeting with the president a couple of years ago, and the mayor who spoke before him, they had a Republican and a Democrat. The Democrat was the mayor of Detroit, Duggan. And the poor man gets up there and says, my city before COVID had gone from 20% unemployment to 7% unemployment. And now with COVID, we're back up to 20%. This is the time the city of Miami was like a 3. And then, but the figure that I later read about Detroit is in the last decade, Detroit had built in the entire city 800 units of residential units. And Miami right then and now has 40,000 under construction and planning. Detroit went from 1.6 million people to something like 700, 600. Miami proper, greater Miami, is on its way to being 3, 4, 5 million people. And we still have some challenges, and one of them is my big deal with transportation. I want mass transportation to be effective and inexpensive. Ideally, zero. The great cities in the world don't charge public transportation. Miami's trolley system, you know how much it costs for the user? Zero. The Metro Mover, zero. And I had to fight my county commissioner colleagues. They wanted to charge for the Metro Mover. Oh no, we need to charge because this is for elites in downtown. I go, no. You must not ride the Metro Mover a lot. You don't see the students. You don't see the construction workers. You don't see the hospital workers. You don't see the restaurant and hotel workers. And they connect thanks to another ally of ours, Mayor Lago in Coral Gables. They connect by free trolley from Coral Gables to the city of Miami. They connect to downtown, to the Metro Mover, and again for free, all the way to Jackson and to the health and the civic center, or south to Mercy Hospital and Coconut Grove. Yeah. It's the one thing that would make us a really great city if we can complete that system, because right now it's just 2 branches, outside of the urban core. One doesn't even get to Hialeah, and the other one gets to Dadeland and should go all the way to Florida City, 21 more miles, and it should be a system like that. Yeah. Like Chicago has, for example.
When we interviewed Francis last week, he was saying that Miami has problems of success, and he was kind of painting and illustrating the picture. Well, yeah, maybe New York and Chicago, they have amazing public transport. But then when you look at the city, you look at the capital that's coming out, you look at the homicide rates, you look at, you actually go to the city and see how it is. It's like, well, I think I prefer Miami. So, but again, it's good that the city can always have progression, because if the city's perfect, then I have a feeling that there's something that's going wrong very soon. If it's a perfect city, but then again, I think Miami, like he said, has to be one of, if not the greatest city right now in the United States of America. But I want to say, again, your son is his last term, and I asked him, I was like, hey, do you have any plans to run for governor? He's like, well,
You want to talk turkey here, a little politics.
So,
as opposed to political science or policy, you want to talk politics.
So, yeah, I mean, just because I'm really interested, because I know you wrote the book Miami Dynasty about you and your son, right? What is the future of you, that Miami Dynasty that you guys see? Is there another election for you? Is there another election for your son, you think? What is...
Well, that's the thing about yesterday at the State of the City. What happened at the recent State of the City, I should say. And it just didn't seem like the ending of anything. It seemed like a continuum that would maybe, I don't know what the next step would be for him. I don't know what the next step would be for me. I know what my wife wants the next step to be for me, which is to stay home and be quiet and enjoy my 11 grandchildren. But in Francis's case, I can speak more openly. He's not that interested in the legislative role. Like, he's not that interested in Congress. U.S. Senate, I mean, when you represent the state of Florida, which I think at last count, 23, 24, 25 million people, one of the largest economies in the world. Yeah. California, I think, is the 6th largest economy as a jurisdiction. Miami's probably, well, you probably have Texas and New York and Miami in Florida right after that. So it's probably one of the top 10 economies in the world. Being a U.S. Senator is nice, but I think what he really likes is executive. I think he would love to run for governor. And he has said that, I'm not hiding anything. Would he ever run for Dade County mayor? Would I ever run for Dade County mayor? Well, we just had elections. And what happened in the elections politically is pretty evident now that Miami-Dade County is no longer likely to elect, at least in presidential years, as many Democrats as in the past. And so that's tempting, I'm sure, for him. And for me, I'm not going to go kindly into the night. I can say that.
We'll leave that for the viewers to...
Yeah, we'll leave that for the viewers to interpret. It's just from our perspective, owning an investment company and having consistent conversation with investors and seeing truly the growth that has happened in Miami, it's almost like one of these sensations of not wanting it to end. And if it has to come to an end, putting it in the hands of somebody that will take just as good care of it so that we can ensure the future growth of the city, because we are truly in the trajectory of exponential growth for the city of Miami. So it's entrusting it to someone that can ensure that, because the truth is that since we live here, right, we may be biased, but we want to win, right? Like, we came here to win. So it's one of those things where, how do we ensure...
That reminds me of Ronald Reagan,
Yeah.
What he said to the Soviets. You lose, I win. We win. We win, you lose.
That's it.
Nobody had ever said that to him.
I have that winner's mentality and that winner's mindset. Like, how do we ensure that the trajectory stays positive so that 10 years down the line, 2 decades down the line, 3 decades down the line, the future generation can reap the benefits and can be the true benefactors of decisions that are going to be made in the next 11 months.
And it really, in terms of economics, the saying really does apply, that a rising tide lifts all ships. And Miami, this rising tide, and by the way, there's a quantitative aspect to this. I was explaining it to Francis the other day because he knows how much I like math. The rule of 72. If you have steady growth in double digits, okay, 10, 11, 12%, you will double your core value, whatever that may be, in 6 years. You divide 72 by 12 and you get 6 years. And that's exactly what just happened in the city of Miami. He said it yesterday. About 5 or 6 years ago, the tax base of the city was 40 billion. Now it's 90 some billion. And how we apportion that, whether at the same time as you're increasing valuation, you should be decreasing millage rates, particularly to protect people who are on fixed incomes and who bought when the properties were worth a lot less. And there's all kinds of reforms that we need to do. Marco Rubio, to his great credit, led one of those reforms, which is Save Our Homes. But so you don't increase, once you bought a place, you don't increase by more than 3% in any one year, the taxable value. But we need to do more than that because you have new owners. And, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, if we can get back to what the homestead exemption was supposed to do, which was $25,000 in 1979, okay? Right now, it should be the average value of a home, okay? The average value of this home or any home in this neighborhood, whatever it may be, $250,000, let's say, should not have to pay a penny in real estate taxes. There's way too many other properties and way too many other taxes that we benefit from. The city gets its share of the bed tax, the luxury tax, the liquor tax, and of course we should not have tolls. We should not charge people to use highways that were built 30 years ago and that are in perfectly good shape. That's wrong.
Whoa, I really agree with that one. I really agree with that one. It kind of pisses me off sometimes because I think it's very fascinating you bring that up because sometimes I'm driving. I've spoken to him before. I'm like, why does this exist? Like, like this wasn't here before. It was working perfectly fine before the tolls. Why do the tolls have to be put into it? But that's
a whole different conversation. I'd like to ask this. You and I have had extensive conversation, and I hold you to a very high regard and respect. I think that you're also a brilliant mind. For the future, right? For the future, just selfish question here. What do you think are the top 3 traits in which a civic leader, a city mayor, anyone of high position should be held by, not just by the constituents, but standards that they should set for themselves?
Ethics is absolutely necessary. I would tell kids in high schools and stuff, when you're working in a company in the old days and you went home and you thought, God, I need that white paper, I need that paper, the stapler, I need this, I need a couple of extra pens, Don't take anything from work to your house. Don't, even little things like that. Don't bend rules. Oh, the Sunshine Law says this, this, and that, and you're not supposed to talk to other commissioners, so you figure out some other ways to get around that. It's not necessarily a good law, but it's in the books, And so ethics is number one. You got to have competence. We need more people that understand mathematical models, that understand value, accrual, present value calculations, that understand transportation models, queuing theory. I taught all of that at the university level, but a little bit of math, a little bit of accounting, a little bit of economics. And then I always tell them, if you can't put together a group of 200 people that will donate $5 or $10 to your campaign, don't run for office. If you don't have 200 people or 100 at least initially. My very first event was at the old Everglades Hotel, and it was in such bad shape, and it rained cats and dogs that day. And the water was coming down. We had to put buckets in next to the walls so the water was coming down. We charged $15 a person. And talk about drugs, I remember somebody who was from DEA or something that was attending there, and he said, you had a great gathering. We had like 400 or 500 people. We didn't make much money at $15 per person. We fed them. The booze had to be, cash bar. But he said, I looked around. I didn't have a single client here. The DEA guy says there was no one that looked like that I would have to arrest them. And then hard work too. I mean, if you have someone that you can see that doesn't have the discipline to get up in the mornings, to make it to work on time, 90% of the jobs in government, that's basically, be clean, be on time, and be respectful. And but at the top, you should, and this is the fourth item. I've said three so far. Here's the fourth one: creativity and ingenuity.
I love that.
That is the icing on the cake. And somebody was telling me that they were driving around and seeing things that I had proposed. Jeff Bartell, one of my he's a Harvard grad too, by the way, but he was saying that, he was driving around the other day and he said, oh my God, this is one of Xavier's ideas way back, what they're calling the signature bridge, et cetera, et cetera.
That was an idea of yours?
Well, not quite the way it was carried out. Actually, it was the inverse of that. I wanted to go under.
Okay.
And still want to take Biscayne Boulevard under, by the way, and cut and cover. You go down 10 feet,
okay.
You hit the water table, and then you cover it with another 10 feet, so you don't have to do a lot of, impermeable surfaces. And but I use my engineering background for a lot of the stuff. I mean, but being creative, well, I won't get into that because it has to do with Francis's vision. What Francis had a vision on high tech and tech finance, or what do you guys call it? Fintech. Was just astounding. In Democracy in America 2024, by the way, there's a little treatment in one of the chapters of cryptocurrency, and there's a conversation between Francis and a certain congresswoman from this area explaining it. We have to be very careful not to fall into the trap, talk about his business, that the private sector did with office buildings and ending up with surplus of offices when the sector changed to a lot of people working out of their homes. In government, a lot of the administrative work of government now is so repetitive that it's done by computers. And you don't need a lot of managers. The county has 4,283 managers, okay? For a business that doesn't have competition, that you fix prices, and that if the person doesn't pay the fee, you take away their home. I mean, the three of us can manage that from here, sitting, with a little computer.
I love the fact that you are strong enough to make emphasis on that, because most people that situation is brought up, they stick with the bureaucracy, or they find a way to justify the 283 managers that can
4,280.
that and if you think about it, right? If you think about it, there needs to be a more precise way of government operation to ensure that we can maximize the income and the revenue that's being generated. If you have that 4,200 and however many managers, right, to do the job of, let's say, a couple of computer programs and maybe 10 top guys, then we need to find a way to better allocate those funds.
Absolutely. The situation in LA with the water and sewer department, I don't know if you saw what the director was being paid and the argument. $750,000.
Yeah, I saw, yeah.
And they said, oh, but we have to compete with the private sector, and that's what they pay. The same thing they told me about Jackson Memorial. My very good friend is the president, Carlos Migoya. But once that facility or any government department is straightened out and it has the right people in the right places, you don't have to compete with the private sector, because the private sector people don't necessarily want to go there for the salary that you should be paying them, and it should not be $750. No one in government should be paid more than, and I'm going to get in trouble when I say this, but I try to lower salaries in the city. I did in 1985, and I tried in 1997 and 98. I mean, the county now has 265 people that make over $200,000, and lawyers that make over 300, and then the pensions are based on the salaries of the last 3 years. You can't do that. Okay, that has to change. So government has to become a lot more efficient so that there is more trickle down and charge less for public goods. The whole idea of a public good, transportation, parks, etc., museums, we shouldn't charge people to go to museums. We shouldn't charge people to use highways. And that's the ultimate public good. You already have to pay for your car, insurance, tags, all these things required by government, and charging them to use a highway that's already built 30 years ago with taxes that were, that doesn't make any sense. And we need to do that because the person, in my book, Democracy in America, I have at least two excerpts where I talk about how much the person working in the service sector. We're always going to have at least 20% in a city that relies on tourism, people working doing manual work. And to be competitive, you can't pay them as much, but don't tax them. Don't tax them. Don't tax them when they fix their house. Because you have to put a canister out there to pick up the garbage, and you have to pay this. No, let them fix their own homes, and don't tax them a permit fee and penalties for everything. So that the government has to do that. And insurance. That's another topic for another discussion one day. There is absolutely no reason why rates should be going up in the eastern part of Florida, because the western part of Florida has issues with hurricanes. 1992, we had Hurricane Andrew. And what did we do? I live in a high rise, okay? And I lived in a high rise in 1992. And now we have shutters, mandatory shutters, okay? And if you're not around when a hurricane is coming, we have the right to go into somebody's property and break down their door and put the shutters up, And once you close a building, and what about flood insurance? That's crazy. What do you mean? I'm on the 11th floor. What do I need to pay flood insurance for? But anyhow, once you close a building from the engineering standpoint, you're not going to have a lot of damage. On the surface, sometimes if a wind reaches 150 miles an hour and a piece of board or branch or something hard hits it, you can have a little damage. But
for the most part, nothing extensive.
No. And just because in the west coast of Florida, there are people who want to live at, basically, right next to the bay, and in single family homes, but we have structures, and they're very well put together. I have a unit in one of them, and let me tell you, that thing's not going anywhere. Forget 150 miles. Winds, you can do 200-mile winds. It won't affect that building. So insurance, and then you have the deductibles. It's crazy because with the deductibles go up as a percentage of the value of the property. The value of the property keeps going up, so the deductibles keep going up. We haven't gotten a single penny in our building. I did a 5-year history, 0 claims, and then of course they don't cover landscape. And that's the biggest damage in the central part of. By the way, you should have seen the second and third day of the hurricane in 1992. What I was telling the national media, when I realized that the hurricane had hit way down south, outside of my jurisdiction, and it was actually, we had a lot of jobs. So I wanted to tell people the second day we opened Bayside, right next to the bay. Okay, we cleaned up a little bit of damage. And Bayside was open the second day after Hurricane Andrew.
Yeah.
So, and unfortunately, part of the time we're fighting the media. I was doing that in the last couple of days on the issue of sea level rise.
Yeah.
I'll send you some of the stuff on that.
Well, what I want to do is I want to link in the description for the viewers all your books and publications, anything that you have to offer that people can read up on about you, because I think we could be here for hours and you could keep going on 100 different subjects that you're well educated on, and I want people to learn more about what you have to say. But seriously, I appreciate your time. I had fun. Hopefully we can do it again.
Thank you, and thank you for incredible questions. Perceptive. Made me work hard here intellectually.
That's good. I appreciate it, and like
I
said,
always say that iron sharpens iron, so it's always a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thank you very much.